Shawty, why you only see in my dreams? How my mind away up in my fantasy.
Hello, and welcome to my channel. I'm Khimiracle, and today I'm going to share my testimony. My goal here is to highlight the peaks and valleys of my life and give you all an idea of who I am and what I've been through. I've been told that I have an interesting story, and I've had some unique experiences. Before we go into any of the craziness that's happened in my adult life, I want to paint a picture of what kind of person I was growing up. You know, who was Kid Khimiracle? I would describe myself, and I think most people would agree, that I was quiet, smart, kind, and athletic. I've been more of a listener than a talker for as long as I can remember. As a child, and even into high school, I definitely had a lot of shyness as well. I liked to read, and I had a few close friends that I would hang out with, but I wasn't raising my hand in class to answer every question or doing anything to get any additional attention onto me. I always got relatively good grades in school. I was an A and B student. I enjoyed getting good grades and learning things, depending on the subject, of course. I didn't try or study or anything like that until high school. I would say that I speak standardized tests. They just came naturally to me. I was always above grade level, or 90+ percentile across the board. And you might be thinking at this point, like, I really don't want to listen to this guy talk about how great he is for the next 10 minutes, but relax, I'm just stating some facts, getting some background, and once again, I'm talking about the past. Stick with me, this isn't a story about some overpowered superhero that just crushes all of their obstacles. It gets real. I was a nice guy, pretty plain and simple. And as long as I wasn't sitting next to one of my close friends, teachers pretty much universally liked me. As an introvert, I could be talkative on the right subject and with the right person. You couple that with not really needing to pay attention in class, you have a recipe for less than stellar classroom behavior. But I digress. I was someone who would try and help anyone that didn't understand what was going on in class. I was also the type of guy to stick up for kids that would get bullied or not picked for groups and teams, which leads me to the last aspect. I've always been one of the taller people in my class. I'm 6 feet tall now, and I remember going through growing pains real early. My father owned a martial arts studio, so I started training before I started school. I knew how to fight, and I wasn't afraid to prove it. In grade school, there were a number of people that were willing to test that, but by the time I moved to the city where my dad's school was located, in middle school, that had all changed, and I didn't really have much more fights. By high school, I really started to get into football, and I fell in love with the sport. I was never very strong, but I was fast. I had excellent body control from years of martial arts, taking Tung Sudol with my father, and I was willing to throw my body around. At that level, that was enough. By the time I graduated, I got an offer to walk on at University of Florida, but I wanted to play, and I felt I was too small to get a real chance at a D1 school. So I chose a smaller school that's also played some games that were all around the country. It was the summer after graduating high school. I had the worst sore throat of my life, and it wouldn't go away. I had been feeling very tired recently, to the point where I was having trouble waking up in the morning to train for football. Since at this time football was my life, it was very unlike me to skip anything remotely related to it. I went to a nearby clinic because my mom suggested that I might have strep throat. When the swab came back negative, they took blood, and instead of giving me the results, they told us to go to the hospital, which I knew was not a good sign. I packed up some clothes, headed to the hospital, and was diagnosed with leukemia. In order to determine what kind of leukemia I had, they had to perform a bone marrow biopsy and aspiration. Yes, it is as painful as you're probably imagining it to be. Since my treatment was going to be intense and require a lot of medicine going in and blood going in and out, I was given a Hickman catheter. It was basically 3 tubes that went into my heart from the top and came out with 3 lines. And those 3 lines is where I received 2 types of chemo and numerous blood and platelet transfusions. My first round of chemotherapy required about 3 weeks of hospitalization. The next 2 rounds were a month apart and only required a week of hospitalization each. A few months after my last treatment, I had a meeting with another oncologist to discuss if I needed to have any further treatments. I was told that I should have a bone marrow transplant, but in order to have a transplant, you need to have a match. So my family and I ran a few drives to get potential donors. In the end, none of those people were a match for me. However, a national search found a match in DC. By the time they found a donor, I had already gone through all the testing to make sure that I was healthy enough to attempt the procedure. My bone marrow transplant protocol included 3 days of total body irradiation and 4 days of chemo. They give you a lethal dose of chemo and radiation that kills all of your bone marrow and prevents it from making blood or immune cells. After the chemo and radiation, I received the bone marrow, which was anticlimactically basically just a blood transfusion. The transplant is followed by 100 days of isolation, which is actually pretty similar to the situation we're all in right now, except with probably 1,000 more rules and the chance of immediate death. I started my bachelor's within a couple months of finishing the 100 days of isolation. I was still very sick and took 20 plus pills twice a day when I first started school. I was very weak and it was difficult for me to walk to class some days. I ended up transferring schools 4 semesters in a row. 1 community college, 3 universities, and 5 years of classes later, I finally graduated. My GPA was barely above a 3 and my science GPA wasn't even that. But I finished and I did the most important thing you can do in college, and that is I graduated with years of work experience. I found a job within a few months of graduating and realized quite early that I was not cut out for entry-level positions. I need a bit more autonomy in my work, and I wasn't going to get that with just a bachelor's. Thankfully, it was around this time that I was taking off the last of my medications from the bone marrow transplant. Mentally, it felt like I had woken up for the first time in years. I had become used to thinking and concentrating at a decreased capacity, so it wasn't until I was healthy again that I realized just how much I had lost cognitively, and conversely, how much more I was going to be able to do now. I decided that I was going to go back to school. I wanted to do more with my life than a 9 to 5 at a beverage company, and I wasn't satisfied with having a job that required basically no thought whatsoever. I looked up some nearby schools and found one that I could apply to in the summer and start in the fall. So I started studying for the GRE. I studied about 80 hours over a couple months and aced it, and then went on to get my master's from a local university. While I was there, I won a number of scholarships and oral presentations. This helped me get to where I wanted to go, which was a world-renowned university. My success during my master's gave me the confidence to shoot for the stars for my PhD. But I still covered all my bases by applying to safety schools as well. I applied to 10 schools, including Mayo, Wash U, Stanford, and Hopkins. I got interviews at 7 of those 10. No, Stanford was not one of them. And I got accepted everywhere I interviewed. I chose Hopkins because I liked the people, I actually liked Baltimore, still do, and I wanted to be able to leverage the name recognition if I chose to work outside of academia. I joined the immunology program and went to work like everyone else. Passed my classes, joined the lab of my dreams working on a translational research project in immuno-oncology, and then passed my oral exams. While riding home from the lab one day, I was hit by a car. I didn't approach the intersection as carefully as I could have, and a car from oncoming traffic turned left into me while I was driving about 40 miles an hour. I woke up halfway down the block from the intersection where the crash happened. The EMTs were cutting off my clothes. Final tally, torn ligament in my thumb, torn calf muscle, broken collarbone, and a traumatic brain injury. I took about a week off to recover before returning to research. That wasn't wise. As my body started to heal, my brain started to feel worse. I spent the next few months trying to force my way back to work with very little success. Eventually, I was encouraged to take a break from the program and heal. After a few more failed attempts and a few more months passed, I was encouraged to just write a thesis and get my master's. 2.5 years after my accident, I ended my PhD program with a master's. While I was on break from my program at Hopkins, I met Tiffany online. I fell for her very fast, but she wasn't quite there yet. Story of my life. We were friends for around another 6 months before our first date. She didn't really agree that it was a date until a random person told us to kiss. We dated for another 6 months before I proposed. She accepted, and we got married a month after I completed my thesis for my master's. That about takes us up to the present. Medically, I'm still healing from the brain injury. I'm much better than I was a couple of years ago, but a decent way off from where I was before the accident. Occupationally, I manage the assisted living facility. Hopefully, this glimpse into my past will give a bit of insight into where I'm coming from when I give my opinions in future videos. Leave a comment with which part of my testimony you identified with, what was the most impactful event in your own life, and let me know what part of my story you'd like to hear more of.